In the second half of the 19th century, we were expected to live 30 years on average. Since then, that number has grown almost 2.5 times, and today we can expect to live about 73 years. Medical science has done wonders in regards to our longevity, but some ailments are still a bit marginalized. One such is fear of our own death. This video will explore the views of Stoics and Zen Buddhists with a touch of modern science to gauge the significance of our life's length, its quality, and what advice from the wise can teach us about dealing with our own eventual disappearance. To start off, let's take a look at how we generally spend those 73 years. Most of it, 42% to be more precise, is spent sleeping. We work 17% of our lives, we stare at a screen for 14%, eat for 6%, and go on holidays for 4% of our total lifetime. Then there is school, socializing and pursuing romantic interests that all take their share. Eventually, when everything is added up, we are left with around 10% of the totality of our lives to spend however we want. 10% isn't much, but it gets even worse. Studies have shown that we spend almost half of our lives, around 47%, on autopilot, meaning we're not focused on the outside world or on our tasks, but we're zoned out, concentrating on thoughts that generally make us feel miserable. So that 10% of our me time now becomes 5, meaning that if we take into account the average human lifespan of 73 years, we can expect to live as we truly want for around a little more than 3.5 years. And it seems nothing much has changed in this regard for 2 millennia, as Lucius Annaeus Seneca was very aware of this phenomenon in the 1st century AD. In addressing the oldest members of Roman society, he urged them to consider how much of your time was taken up with a moneylender, how much with a mistress, how much with a patron, how much with a client, how much in wrangling with your wife, how much in punishing your slaves, how much in rushing about the city on social duties. Add the diseases which we have caused by our own acts. Add too the time that has lain idle and unused. You will see that you have fewer years to your credit than you count. Look back in memory and consider when you ever had a fixed plan, how few days have passed as you had intended, when you were ever at your own disposal, when your face ever wore its natural expression, when your mind was ever unperturbed, what work you have achieved in so long a life, how many have robbed you of life when you were not aware of what you were losing, how much was taken up in useless sorrow, in foolish joy, in greedy desire, in the allurements of society, how little of yourself was left to you. If we take Seneca's words into account for today's way of living, even if we are lucky enough to live to be 100 or longer, it will never be enough as we spend just a tiny bit of our lives truly living, the rest being taken away by our vices, our urge to please others at our own expense, our lack of self-control by obsessing over material wealth, by our neglect at recognizing how our actions may hurt others, by being insincere with our own selves, by our lack of self-reflection, our devotion to meaningless work, our lack of giving love to both ourselves and others. To put the nail in the coffin, he concludes that there is no reason for you to think that any man has lived long, because he has gray hairs or wrinkles. He has not lived long. He has existed long. And to learn what he means by this distinction between existing and living, Seneca gives us some clues with an idea that completely opposes just this mere existence, the idea of a happy life. For he asks and answers, what is a happy life? It is peace of mind and lasting tranquility. How does a man reach this condition? By gaining a complete view of truth, by maintaining in all that he does order, measure, fitness, and a will that is inoffensive and kindly, that is intent upon reason and never departs therefrom, that commands at the same time love and admiration. So being calm, composed, seeking wisdom and gaining knowledge about who we are, being a good, down-to-earth and reasonable person can make our time more fulfilling, no matter how long we have. Seneca also advises us to free our minds of both pleasures and passions. To Stoics, these are distress, fear, lust, and delight. He suggests we find time to contemplate the universe and our own nature within it, to make our liveliness dependent only on what we hold inside of us, instead of being reliant on outside circumstances. These inner treasures that Seneca holds most precious are our virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. They are not affected by the passing of time and do not depend upon it. With this in mind, he exclaims, "For a virtue is so great a good that it is not affected by such insignificant assaults upon it as shortness of life, pain, and the various bodily vexations. It is the quality of not needing a single day beyond the present, and of not reckoning up the days that are ours. In the slightest possible moment of time, virtue completes an eternity of good. So virtue does not play by the usual rules of time. Instead, it transcends it, with itself being the highest good, making any amount of time, no matter how short, worthwhile and sufficient enough." With this in mind, 1 year of life is good, 100 years of life are good. If you continue our practice, you will attain this stage. This last quote does not belong to Seneca, but to Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, a Zen monk and teacher. Zen Buddhism, a form of Buddhism strictly focused on the meditative practice, or Zazen, has multiple ideas in common with stoicism, as is the case here. The attainment of awareness by experiencing our true, as they call it, Buddha nature, that manifests as the calmness of mind, is the highest achievement. To quote, essence of mind, original face, Buddha nature, emptiness. All these words mean the absolute calmness of our mind. And this state can be achieved through meditation and acceptance, especially when it comes to suffering and non-attachment, acknowledging that every moment is part of nature, or the Buddha nature, which is the source of and is present in everything in the universe. As with Stoics explaining that wise men will not be swayed by damaging effects of illness, physical pain or insults from others, so does Zen integrate experiences that are generally perceived as harmful. Similarly, the idea here is to observe both so-called positive and negative happenings, but remain neutral, steering away from overly enjoying the good moments and not feeling hurt during the bad ones. Instead, learning to accept our short, temporary existence and everything life throws at us, and having a neutral stance toward it, is the preferred course of action, which resolves much of our personal issues. With this in mind, Suzuki Roshi states, if you understand yourself as a temporal embodiment of the truth, you will have no difficulty whatsoever. You will appreciate your surroundings, and you will appreciate yourself as a wonderful part of Buddha's great activity, even in the midst of difficulties. This is our way of life. With big mind, we accept each of our experiences as if recognizing the face we see in a mirror as our own. For us, there is no fear of losing this mind. There is nowhere to come or to go. There is no fear of death, no suffering from old age or sickness. Because we enjoy all aspects of life as an unfolding of big mind, we do not care for any excessive joy, so we have imperturbable composure. To expand on this, Zen Buddhists also hold that the end of any human life, no matter how long, always returns to its initial state, its true nature, to that elusive phenomenon which holds no form, but can always become it. This formlessness is seen as emptiness or nothingness, and by accepting it as the ultimate truth, Zen Buddhists are encouraged to see that everything that exists has come from nothingness and will eventually return to it. This results in the notion that every existence is a part of nothingness and is made from it. As such, our life and death are the same thing. When we realize this fact, we have no fear of death anymore, and we have no actual difficulty in our life. Furthermore, nothingness exists beyond the boundaries of time. Our lives, no matter how long, represent just a brief flash in its enormity. So it is of no use to be attached to our mind and body, as they are eventually going to return to their original formlessness, no matter whether we like it or not. So with departing from this self-centered idea of holding on to our mind and body, and with the embrace of the internal emptiness, we may gain the ability to lessen our needless suffering. When we realize that everything we see is a part of emptiness, we can have no attachment to any existence. We realize that everything is just a tentative form and color. Thus we realize the true meaning of each tentative existence. When we first hear that everything is a tentative existence, most of us are disappointed, but this disappointment comes from a wrong view of man and nature. It is because our way of observing things is deeply rooted in our self-centered ideas that we are disappointed when we find everything has only a tentative existence. But when we actually realize this truth, we will have no suffering. And there is a way to expand upon these words even beyond the teachings of Buddhism, and we can do this by looking at science. With our current knowledge, the main thesis is that the universe came into existence from a single point of pent-up energy. This point, also called singularity, burst open, the energy from it expanding rapidly and eventually cooling down, forming gas and dust, which in time collapsed to form stars. After long periods of time, these stars exploded and thus created the rest of the chemical elements, with us finally being one of the byproducts. Energy, as a creative force in this closed system, our universe, is ever present and constant, but formless. Even though it doesn't have form, it can become form, just like it's the case with dust, clouds, stars, and finally us. Since it lacks material shape, it may be thought of as emptiness, but not voidness. Even in vacuum, true nothingness, meaning the absence of everything, does not exist. We know now that even seemingly void space is bustling with activity. There is constant movement of temporary random changes of energy in any point in space. These movements are called quantum or vacuum fluctuations. So even if something may seem like nothing, it's not. Energy is ever present, no matter whether we see it or not. It is constant, its amount in the universe never changes, instead it transforms from one type or form into another, and it will continue to do so even after we draw our inevitable final breath. As Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, every one of your molecules has energy within it. If you get cremated, that energy gets released in the form of heat, and you heat the air and that air radiates to space. You get buried, which is how I want my body to be disposed of. Bury me, because you know why? I don't want the energy content of my body to just get radiated out into space, of no use to anybody. Put me in the ground, let the worms, microbes come in and out of my body, and the energy content of my body that I had assembled over my lifetime consuming the flora and fauna of this earth, my body then returns to them. And thus is the cycle of life. With Neil's almost poetic words, we may conclude that our death is natural and as such inevitable. It may be that if we strive to integrate this thought into our waking life and have a curious mind as to what the wise can teach us, we may begin to find a way at making peace with it, possibly through being more aware of our lives as a whole and having a more active role in them, maybe taking on mindfulness or meditation, or simply trying to be a better person. With thinking about our own end and letting it get to the point that it transforms into an idea that motivates us, as every moment becomes more valuable, we may reduce our suffering and let our minds and bodies be used in accordance with and return to nature as they are meant to. And no matter whether we are to live to a ripe old age of 101, experience a fatal accident in our teens, or perish from a terminal illness in our 40s, making our limited moments more meaningful may be just the thing to set us free from our attachment to our own body and mind, and maybe even allow us to experience a few more of those rare moments of peace and quiet.